So today we're going to talk about recovery. It's funny because when we talk about building muscle, we talk about losing fat. Losing fat you can do without a tremendous amount of recovery, specifically focused on it. However, if you focus on the recovery piece, you're going to lose a lot more fat. Once you get in a fat oxidizing state and you're actually working in real function, real physiology, you're off this calories in, calories out nonsense. What we have to start looking at is how quickly the body's able to rebuild. And a lot of times, I talk to people all the time. And they're like, "Well, I need more testosterone because that's what's it do." And testosterone's a big piece. I talk all about it all the time. But one of the things I always tell people is you don't need more than enough. The other things that your body has to have to recover, one of the number one things for health, regeneration, wellness, long-term function, everything is oxygen. The very best thing that you can do for recovery, for bodybuilding, for concussion treatments, for neurologic issues like MS and dementia, like that, is hyperbaric oxygen. So I've got a chamber at my office. I've got one at my house. And I use those hyperbaric chambers quite often. What happens with hyperbaric is that it uses something called Boyle's law. Boyle's law is physics. It's not a medical thing. What it does is it says that whenever there's a higher pressure, you can emulsify gas into fluid. So what that basically means is that, if you've ever had a carbonated drink or you've taken one of those little CO2 canisters and, made water, bubbly water, soda water, that's what we're talking about. When you put high pressure gas onto a fluid, it'll squeeze it into the fluid. And so what that happens with the body, what ends up happening is that normally the hemoglobin are carrying the oxygen. The red blood cells, the little things inside the red blood cells carry the oxygen. However, now you've got two red blood cells both carrying oxygen, but because there's water or plasma between the two red blood cells, you can now take oxygen and force it into that plasma. So now your red blood cells are carrying oxygen and the fluid in between the red blood cells is also carrying oxygen. That's how we can increase the oxygenation to the tissue by 1,000%. This is what I was using during COVID to fix everybody. We brought people in, their pulse oxes were in the high 70s, low 80s. They're barely coherent. I had to help carry a lot of these guys in. We give them a shot of quinine, and then we toss them in the chambers, and 10 minutes later, their pulse oxes were back in the 90s. They were coherent. They were good to go again. And this was an obvious thing. We've been using them for our professional athletes for a long time. All my pro athletes I work with have hyperbaric chambers in their homes. And before games, after practice, things like that, they'll jump in there and recover. I've had some of my athletes, my NFL athletes, tell me that it's the biggest game changer they've added to their careers. One of the guys told me, he was like, I did a crazy hard workout on Wednesday. He was like, jumped in the chamber, went back. He did the same level workout the next day. And he said, I could have done half again more the second day than he did the first day because he's able to recover. But that's the biggest thing, is getting the oxygen in. Hyperbaric's the number one thing. Now, a lot of hospitals have hyperbaric chambers. They just choose not to use them because, again, it's not the thing making them the most money. So if you have issues, COVID is a great example. You're going to have to find a group near you, like Google hyperbaric, that sort of thing. If you have breathing problems, if you have pneumonia, stuff like that, it'll help. But pneumonia is actually one of those problems we can't get the lungs to move. So that has some other things we've got to do for it. So don't just assume that you can do, is any breathing problems a hyperbaric problem. But so outside of like bronchitis and emphysema and stuff like that, it's a phenomenal tool. So I use it all the time. It's one of the reasons that I've been able to acquire the muscle mass and the longevity and the health that I have. I put it directly on hyperbaric. The other thing, when we're talking about oxygen, and we do this all the time, is we do sleep studies. The amount of people who have epilepsy, dementia, fatigue, all sorts of things, low testosterone, all sorts of physiological issues, is because they're not breathing properly at night. One of the big issues that we saw with the COVID vaccine, we see this with all vaccines, but we really saw it with the COVID vaccine, was the amount of damage to the pons. So there's a place in the brainstem called the pons, and it's responsible for what's referred to as autonomic respiration, which is the reason you breathe while you're asleep or while you're passed out or you're not paying attention to it. That area can be damaged by vaccines. We see it a lot in kids. It's called sudden infant death syndrome, and that translated to adults for sudden adult death syndrome after the COVID vaccine rolled out. So if you've had the COVID vaccine, outside of all the other stuff you now have to take, I would highly recommend that you get a sleep study and see what your oxygenation is at night. It's a really, really big one. Like I said, we see that as a big, big piece of everything else. But a lot of the supplementation that I'm taking is also specifically geared towards recuperation, regeneration, and recovery. So, like, all the collagen we're doing. So when I take the collagen, I'm taking it for two reasons. One, gluconeogenesis, so that my liver can actually make new sugar for my blood and for my brain. But the other thing is that the collagen is adding a lot of nutrients to my body for healing, regeneration, for fighting viruses, for doing, decreasing inflammation in my liver, all kinds of things. Collagen is one of the very best things you can take. And I will tell you that I don't think you can do a healthy fast more than like 8 hours without taking collagen. If you don't, your muscle tissue is going to get eaten up because your body has to have amino acids because it has to have sugar for the blood. And if you don't feed it, it will make it, and it'll tear apart your muscle tissues to get it. That's just where it's at. So take a collagen, that's going to be really beneficial. And then whenever you guys are doing, especially if you're working out and you're pushing yourself as hard as I am, you really, really, really need to worry about free radical damage and things like that. So, for instance, if you guys are consuming a lot of fats and you have stress, especially if you're consuming any seed oils, try not to consume seed oils. But that lipid peroxidation is going to be really, really dangerous. Like we talked about the oxidative stress that happens to LDL cholesterol yesterday, how it oxidizes it, and that's when it really becomes problematic. Oxidized LDL is really the big issue we need to work on. And that comes from free radical damage. And so things like vitamin E, things like CoQ10, methylated B vitamins are a big player. There's a whole list, NAC, obviously. There's a whole list of things that are highly beneficial to pushing back against that free radical damage or that reactive oxidative stress that you're going to start picking up the harder you push and the harder you train. So those things are really big. Still, I'm a giant coffee enema fan for recovery. So, if you're not doing some of these things and you're wondering why your gains aren't where they're supposed to be, or you're not, getting stronger, you're sore all the time, that sort of stuff, these are the things that you really got to start looking into. It's the small pieces that are called, so in chemistry, we call them limiting reagents. So think of it this way. If you're going to make, 10 pies and they each require 3 eggs and you only have 5 eggs, you're not going to be able to make 10 pies because you don't have enough eggs. The eggs are your limiting reagent to allow you to, it's what's keeping you from making everything else. So a lot of times we'll see that, for instance, when people have thyroid issues, one of the number one things I see is they're not taking in enough iodine. T3 is 3 iodines. It's triiodose. There's 3 iodines. T4 is 4 iodines. So if you guys aren't specifically taking in iodine in your diet, you're not going to have your thyroid where it's supposed to be. And so then people are going to go over and, oh, my thyroid, this and that. And the doctor's going to give you all sorts of, medications that you don't need because you should have just upped your iodine intake. Now, there's obviously times where you need thyroid medication, but oftentimes it's dietary function that you guys just aren't getting enough iodine in. And you can take iodine, the liquid iodine, you can take the iodine from the superior mineral that's on the Seawell store or the Pillars of Wellness. That one works really well. That one also has boron in it. So if you're worried about your sexual binding globulin hormone being too high, there's research out that shows that helps push that down. But that's the big thing, is making sure that you guys are getting in all the things you need to recover. One of the other big ones is water. People are like, well, I don't want to get waterlogged. Okay. If you drink a gallon of water right before you run, that's a bad idea. But if you keep the water flowing, it'll help flush out all these lactic acid, all this butyric acid, all these waste chemicals. And it'll really, really help you recover. But the other big thing is sleep. You got to make sure that you're sleeping. And the easy way on sleep is set a bedtime, set a wake up time, and be consistent with it. And then, make sure that you guys are getting in, getting to sleep, getting that whole thing, working on, like, the sleep 8's a great way to register that stuff. And then, if you really want to get fancy with it, obviously we talked about testosterone, but there's peptides out there are spectacular. For anti-aging, for things like that, they're really, really beneficial. It's one of the things I can really feel when I work out. Really notice the difference. So peptides are a big, big player. So make sure that if you're going to work on that, you work with someone who understands the whole breadth of what's going on. there's I'm not the only person out here who understands peptides and recovery. So, but those are going to be your big things, is making sure that you're getting in the things to help your body rebuild and recover, because that's where all the muscle growth happens. It's where all the health and wellness happens. It's where a lot of the down things happen, the bad stuff happens. If you don't have enough, for instance, if you don't have enough CoQ10, your body has to make ATP, so it'll make it, but it'll produce a lot of free radicals as well as some ATP. If you have enough CoQ10, you get very few free radicals and a lot of ATP. So when you start pushing yourself, that's when things start getting really kind of hairy. You got to make sure, do I have enough chemicals to make sure my body can heal and recover? And do I have enough chemicals to make myself go? So the go is more the ATP. The recovery stuff is more of the chemicals to keep yourself safe and growing. So if you guys have any questions, hit us up, questions@chalmerswellness.com. Just make sure that you guys get in and get your recovery. That's going to be a big, big piece of hitting all your goals. Thanks for your time.